So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Steve Sully and I'm the director for our London business. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you back to the next edition of Robert Half's Webinar Wednesday series, which has been so well received so far. So today's webinar, I hope you all know it, but it's entitled New Epoch, New Leader, Shape the Next Normal. So far in the series, and I'll probably just help our guest speaker reflect on this in terms of everything that we've covered over the last few weeks. I think this is our 15th webinar from memory. So far we've covered remote management, remote onboarding, leading in uncertain times, the future of work, and working families. All of which has been material pulled together and researched by our very own Katie Tanner, who's our guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a bit more detail in a second. So if any of those subject matters there you've maybe missed or pricked your interest today, all of our webinars, as is this one, is recorded. So reach out to myself or Katie. We'll put our business cards up at the end, or reach out to your normal Robert Half contacts, and we'll get you a copy of that recording. So today's webinar, New Epoch, New Leader. What does that essentially mean? So hopefully I'm not stealing too much of Katie's thunder today, but essentially she will be taking a deep dive into the concept around the self-disruptive leader, whereby she will try to give us some new techniques and word tracks and ways of working that will enable us to pivot more towards technology and innovation to help us improve our people, our processes, and try and shift our businesses from a performance perspective out of survival mode and into more of a thriving mode. So I'll leave it there and let Katie sort of pick that up. But Katie herself said, Katie Tanner, she has been with Robert Half for nearly 20 years now, 17 of which were as an operational director. I was fortunate enough to be led by Katie myself for the 12 years that I've been with the business, so I can rest assured and say safely that we're in for an absolute treat today. So prior to Katie's career, an illustrious career at Robert Half, Katie actually studied psychology and attained a BSc from Bath University, and was actually considering a training to be a clinical psychologist. So that probably gives us a little bit of insight into where Katie's passion for people comes from. But nothing in life gives Katie any more purpose, I suppose would be the right word, and passion than being a mum to 3 lovely children. So without further ado, over to you, Katie.
Hopefully my video is now working. Yes, it is. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. It's lovely to see so many familiar names coming through, and indeed some new names. And as Steve just alluded to, what we're going to talk through today is really, what does the new normal or the next normal look like for leadership? So if we look at what's happened to the economy in the last 10 to 12 weeks, leaders or business leaders have faced greater levels of disruption than ever before. And for the last 50 years or so, the traditional, I guess, predominant leadership style has been very much around control and command, building consistency and executing on those business outcomes. Now, whilst these qualities are still important, it's become very clear through what we've seen in the last 10 to 12 weeks with the amount of change that we've seen, that really the qualities that we're now going to need are going to need to be more future orientated, are going to need to be more change ready skills to really keep us moving forward, and more importantly keep businesses moving with the market trends and demands. So we're going to look at some research today from McKinsey, from Korn Ferry, and some of our own internal experiences that really kind of emphasize that now is the single most important time to look at leadership, rethink our processes around leadership profiles, and what we need to take our businesses back to a growth phase, but also to a financial healthy state. So in this time of intense leadership development, we are going to see, without a shadow of a doubt, a new epoch, a new breed of effective leaders that will emerge. And those leaders of today are going to need to truly lean into their own personal development and embrace uncertainty, navigate complexities and paradoxes, lead with empathy and curiosity. And it's all going to be about failing fast to learn fast, and ultimately being brave and bold. And it is exactly those leadership qualities that are going to take our businesses, if you like, from surviving to thriving. But before we talk about those exact qualities, I just want to explore really what was, what is, and what can be. And what I mean by that is what we now know is no longer. There is there's endless research around change management, navigating transitions. It tells us letting go of what was is super hard. But if we don't, we will never move towards what is and what can be. But actually going through that process elicits feelings of disorientation, low morale, and even resentment for some. So maybe, perhaps think at the moment about your own response about what was. And if we don't address the current challenges around what was, we can't then fully respond to what is. And, the realizations as leaders that you would have come across or had to deal with clarity, into why it's changed, how it's changed, that's exactly what's going to position you best to have a competitive advantage, but also really have that place of financial health. If we talk about what can be, this is the most critical phase. This is the exciting phase. This is where we can influence and shape strategically and planfully and be much more intentional with our leadership style. And this is where we look at, our human capital. We redefine business models. We examine our technology. And this is where leaders are so uniquely poised right now to guide and shape their organization into what will be. So before we move into talking specifically about the qualities that are now needed in this new age of leadership, I think it would be great to ask everyone on the call, in your current leadership role, what is the same and what has changed? So if you could just go into the chat function and just, or if you prefer, you can message myself or Steve directly, but if you could just put in the chat function just to see if we can see some patterns or themes of what has changed and what hasn't changed. So I'll just give that a few moments just so I can see the chat function coming through. Hopefully the chat function, any problems with it working, then please let me know. Thanks, Will. Totally agree. Same deadlines. So what we can see coming through is the job is predominantly stayed the same, but the way that we do it is differently, i.e. I guess remote working from home. People are still the heart of everything, which I think is absolutely perfect. And I think any leader's role is to protect and impress their team, absolutely. The importance to still deliver results, that hasn't changed. So as you can see by these coming through, a lot has stayed the same. It's the how that's changed. And I think that's what we need to be mindful of. Our vision, our purpose, no doubt those things have stayed the same and actually have probably been our North Star throughout the last 10 to 12 weeks. But it's super important that we now recognize and think about what can be. So before we do that, we're just going to talk about the balance and how we balance the tensions of leadership. Because the reality is, one moment you're being asked to be empathetic, the next moment you're being asked to, make some really, really tough decisions. And ultimately, that's the challenge of leadership today. We have to have the ability to balance traditional command and control with agility and flexibility. And let's not underestimate actually how hard that is. And I think, some really good examples of probably what you're you may well be facing, and I know certainly we have in Robert Half, is think about how the last 10 weeks, we've not only had to be an expert, we've had to be a learner. That ability to blend all of our deep knowledge and expertise while still having an openness to learning about new processes and technologies. We've got the constant versus the adapter, that ability to fail and learn fast, while still being a secure and solid base for your team, someone that they come to help them make decisions, but being comfortable enough to not always stick with your guns with the decision when you see that sometimes new information's coming through that would encourage you to reverse those decisions or adapt them. And then lastly, the tactician versus the visionary. it is so important more now than ever that as leaders we create the North Star, the vision for your team, whilst on the other hand, providing ideas and goals that are grounded in reality. So this is truly, you know, we're going to talk through 5 specific leadership qualities, but the balance and the ability to manage the tensions between leadership, that underpins everything. So there are so many more that we could talk about. It would be a webinar in its own right. But I think the key here is to try and avoid overemphasizing one approach over the other. The best leaders toggle between them and move between them seamlessly. But to be able to do that, you have to have great self-awareness, an openness to learning, and also having a real contextual awareness, knowing when to lever one side more than the other to help you shape the team and the organization. So we're going to move on now and look at the qualities of leadership through the acronym of the word SHAPE, as you can see on the screen right now. And we're going to talk through the desired leadership qualities one by one, and each one of them is really talking about how you need to self-destruct. And to do that, that's going to help you succeed by challenging yourself, by challenging the status quo. That's going to help you become agile, self-aware, emotionally and socially intelligent, and be assured yet humble. So it doesn't really matter what stage of recovery you're in right now, whether you're returned to work, whether you're still 100% everyone working from home, or when we're in hopefully 6 months, 9 months time, totally back in reform phase. All of these leadership qualities will be useful for no matter what stage of recovery you're at. So the first letter of the acronym we're going to look at is S for SHAPE. And I guess now more than ever, your leadership mindset is so, so important. And as you can see, this is all about seeking opportunity and anticipating. And you could argue is, you know, when you're thinking about opportunities and anticipation, is your current view and reality focused on overcoming the challenges? And how is that mindset affecting your team, your customers? Or are you leaning much more into optimism? And how's that helping you move along? How's that helping you gain momentum towards reimagination and reform? So any of you that are on the call, like us in Robert Half, who've been with a traditional organization where our traditional model of leadership will have a long history, you've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You've got to be willing to take risks when you can't have the whole picture. Our old playbooks no longer guarantee success, and that's really, really hard. And to build resilience and work towards the return stage and beyond, it's necessary to lean in and listen to your team, your customers, yourself, because actually they're going to give you the feedback to actually make the decisions that you need to do. But I think what we would recommend from everything that we've read, everything we've researched, and our own internal experience would be the best leaders always devote a significant amount of time to always thinking beyond these tough times so they can transform and innovate for when the worst is over. And that's going to be about who can bounce back quickest, who can give and have the greatest competitive advantage. And by doing this, by engaging everyone around you in the future, that gives a sense of purpose, it gives a sense of hope, and it gives everyone the opportunity to turn pain into possibilities. So we're going to ask you some questions now. I don't know, Matt, if the slides, oh, they are working great. So the questions I'd like you to ask yourself about seek opportunity and anticipate. The first one is, how might you need to shift your mindset to see the opportunity in the challenge you and your team are facing? So if you just think about these questions, you're not going to be asked to put them in the chat, but I think they're really good ones to just think about. Where are you at in terms of seeking opportunity and anticipation? Rather than reacting to the future, what do you need to do to shape it? And then what are you doing to make quick judgments and decisions whilst you provide clear direction? So as you can see, there's definitely there's a tension in those questions, there's a balance. But those are great questions to ask yourself about where is your mindset, or perhaps your leader's mindset or your organization's mindset, in terms of the importance of looking for opportunity and anticipating things versus just focusing on what is. So the next letter is all about having a flexible and agile approach. And as leaders, this is probably one of the hardest ones to have, because so much of being a leader is about being decisive, by being in control. And now more than ever, we've got to be willing and open to constantly reviewing new information, data, and then course correcting where necessary. And to do that, you have absolutely got to be a self-disruptive leader. You've got to have a huge tolerance for ambiguity, that kind of, that uncomfortableness that comes with not knowing what to do. And, I would summarize agility in leadership is kind of, you kind of have that gut feeling, if you like, of knowing what to do, even when you don't know what to do. Listen to that voice, because that's super important right now. And you're not always going to get it right, but you will learn, and you can certainly course correct. So think in your organization, what kind of structures promote flexibility? Because again, that's hard. And by taking a step back, by devoting a certain amount of time to thinking about these things, it will slow us down initially, but it will allow us to go faster. And it's exactly that agility, that ability to be nimble, change direction when we don't have the full picture, which is what's going to take your business to the next level. And, I guess what is an agile organization? It's kind of one of those questions which is super hard to answer, but some research that I read from McKinsey, they gave 5 key descriptors of whether you're working for an agile organization. And the first one would be, are you obsessively customer-centric and committed to creating value? Not just for your customers, but stakeholders, employees, partners. The second one, are you working in a network of small, empowered teams? The third one is, are you using rapid decision cycles, breaking down decisions into mini milestones and executing on those in very focused bursts? The fourth one is a very strong people model. And some of the comments that came through on the chat was the importance of putting people first. That absolutely is part of having an agile organization. And then the fifth one is radically rethinking technology and how it can support and provide customer value. So those are just some ways of kind of thinking, do you have a flexible and agile approach in your leadership style? But some questions to specifically ask yourself could be, how can you develop your own ability to be more agile in your approach? How comfortable are you with avoiding the temptation to stick with a decision? And how can you slow down to go faster? That one is definitely, I think, been the most hardest from any leader I've spoken to. That agility is definitely a skill that takes a lot of practice. Some people are naturally better at it than others, but if you practice this and you really think about your own ability and how you can focus time on it and lean into your own personal leadership development, that is a skill that can just grow and grow and grow. So the next part of the acronym is A, which is all about accelerating innovation. And I think everyone on this call would say what they have managed to achieve in the last 10 to 12 weeks, the speed has been phenomenal. And I think, you think of traditional structured organizations, everything's about predictability, the organization's a machine, and everything tends to be siloed or have a hierarchy or have very linear planning. Kind of the innovation has forced everyone to really focus on how can we not only survive, but more importantly, thrive. And, internally in Robert Half, we've seen some from our own clients, some great examples of this, where companies in the retail sector have had to quickly move to an e-commerce method of selling. We've seen customers rapidly move their systems from on-premises to the cloud to enable fully remote functionality. We've seen businesses implementing financial planning tools to improve their scenario modeling. And we've seen, businesses implement, very quickly new supply chain software to assess their supply chain vulnerability. So I'm sure that you can think of some in your own business. If we think of Robert Half, we've implemented software ourselves to offer candidate video shortlists and have virtual. So I guess the question I'd like to ask now, and again, if we could go back to the chat function, is what has been the most successful innovation for you, your team, or your organization over the last 12 weeks? Because I think by asking yourself that, you'll be surprised at how much you've already achieved that we can build upon over the course of the next 12 to 24 weeks and really see, really leveraging all those investments perhaps that we made in technology prior to the virus, but I think it would be really good to just reflect upon, I guess, what the most successful innovation has been for your team, your business, or even one, you know, for yourself. I'll just give it a moment for them to feed through, but great. So webinars, tweaking systems to enable working from home, definitely. I mean, video conferencing, let's be honest, if technology, you know, wasn't our friend before this, it's, you know, a family member now. I think the reality that we've given everyone autonomy to work from home, absolutely. There's been a huge leap of trust for lots of organizations, lots of teams. And I think, you know, as we go, what we've seen certainly in Robert Half is we, you know, start returning back into the office, you know, working from home is going to remain part of probably how we work going forward for most of the organization. And I think it's been shown so far that, you know, it can be pretty effective. So whilst we're thinking about innovation and how we can really build on that, if we just ask some questions really that might just help you if you know, are struggling to kind of identify where has been the best innovation for you, is how can you break down larger initiatives into smaller projects to execute and make rapid decisions? Because by breaking things down piece by piece, that means absolutely you can innovate and get, you know, really get much further along on the journey of changing things. The next question would be, how can you adjust your current leadership approach to put your people at the heart of your processes? Now, people has come through as a common theme throughout the chat function today. So it sounds like most people are doing that already, but it's absolutely key. You cannot have process without people. So it's key that they're at the heart of it. And how do you need to radically use technology differently to deliver value to your customers? So we're going to go on to the next one now, which is all about partnering to trust and also advance. And if you think about the pandemic, I'm sure, you know, yourselves have worked with internally and externally closer with people than ever before. And if you think about it, competitors have come together to solve problems that impact the world. And, you know, a great example of that would be Apple and Google coming together to really work on the contact tracing. And I think, you know, that's a huge advancement. That's how we're going to move forward now, is by working together, having that collaborative nature. You know, collaboration is one of those buzzwords that gets bandied around. I think now more than ever, collaboration or collectivism is coming into its own. So I think how we partner internally and externally is really powerful, and we need to take advantage of that. These innovations don't happen working in silo. It doesn't work without having someone who can constructively criticize, or, you know, confrontation. You know, confrontation should be welcomed. You know, leaders who have the ability to partner effectively will understand that innovation comes from exactly that. You know, it will come from a mindset. You know, everyone's had to have a mindset shift, because obviously there are boundaries around competitors. But if you think about it, coming together is so much more powerful, and it helps you avoid that command and control. And by doing that, you naturally empower people, which will engage and motivate and result in much more original thinking than perhaps we had before. So I think, you know, if we can make everything center around individuals, people at the heart of any team and organization, that will be key, because that will endeavor engagement, motivation, trust, which ultimately will, equate to results. But I guess, you know, the role here as a leader, this is about seeking to express. This is not about impressing. This isn't about us. This is about us partnering and helping our teams trust, which is super, super important. So some questions to ask yourself about where you are in regards to partnering to trust, and obviously to advance the business, is what new networks or partnerships have you established internally and externally? The next one, how are you integrating diverse perspectives and values? Because that's really important right now. You know, still having that diversity, having that diverse thought is super important. Going to those people who will naturally self-disrupt, those people that always challenge the status quo, that's, you know, we should be actively seeking out those people. And then how can you challenge the boundaries that exist to share ideas and enable higher levels of performance? Because that's that challenge in itself is what's going to take your team, your business, your organization to the next level. So the last letter, which I'm sure you're glad to hear, I'm glad I didn't pick a really long word, I'm glad we stuck with shape, is energized through empathy and purpose. So for me, this is the one, you know, I said earlier, I think agility is the toughest one. For me, energized through empathy and purpose, this is the one that really resonates with me personally. And I think purpose is the new strategy, if it wasn't before anyway. And purpose, quite literally, is the reason to why you do something. It's the reason that drives you, your team. It's what pulls everyone together. It's how people rally. And, you know, there have been great examples of that over the last 10 to 12 weeks in terms of how that's pulled everyone together. If you think about the stories of how people have pulled their resources and critical supplies together to help when it's not even been part of their operating model. You know, hotels have been providing accommodation to key workers and the homeless. Restaurants have turned into delivery companies to feed those on the front lines. And, you know, vehicle manufacturers have, you know, developed new manufacturing procedures at lightning speed so we could produce the PPE and everything else. So a clear defined purpose is the heart of any great organization. And it's important that we still focus on that and we bring people back to that North Star, because it will help people understand how what they do fits in with the wider organization, but also it will really help people understand why certain decisions have been made. And, you know, with furlough coming towards an end at the end of July, there are going to be some tough decisions for every organization. Having, you know, revisiting that vision, revisiting that purpose will help massively with the wider organization to understand. And I think when we turn to empathy, you know, as leaders, you have to wear so many different hats at any point of the day. But I think now more than ever, we need to become counselors in chief. And what I mean by that is the pandemic has touched everyone in different ways. And, you know, it's still affecting people. And some people are coming to work and they're grieving. And I don't just mean for lost ones, but perhaps for the way their life once was, their job, you know, even if you haven't been furloughed or you've not been made redundant, whatever it might be, everyone's job is significantly changed. It's really hard to, as we said right at the beginning, to let go of what was. So it's super important that as leaders, we acknowledge that we encourage people to take a break, you know, refer them, if you've got them, to employee assistance programs, or just simply giving some heartfelt words of encouragement or gratitude at the end of a long day. And this is where culture comes in. You know, any success lies in the company culture, and that is determined absolutely from the leadership, from the way they treat their people, their partnership, their flexibility of redirection, and the imagination to innovate. So I think it's super important that we acknowledge that we're going to have to make tough decisions. That's not going to go away, but we have to make those decisions with humanity. So some questions to ask yourself, perhaps where you are or your team or your organization is at with energizing through empathy and purpose would be, how are you uniting your team through a core sense of purpose? How are you energizing people, giving purpose, whilst keeping people optimistic, keeping them focused on seeing those silver linings? Because that's what's going to help motivation and engagement. And then the final question is, how are you leading with empathy in the face of ambiguity? Because when you're uncertain or you're not comfortable yourself, that's so much harder to lead with empathy than when things are going super, super well. So if we bring it together now and think about shape, and we think about all of those qualities that we've spoken about, I guess a really good question would be to ask yourself is, how do you want your team to describe you today? If we went into their homes or into an office and asked them to describe you, how do you think they would describe you right now? And what behaviors will they need to see from you to support this? So if they're saying great things, then what behaviors do you need to continue doing? If perhaps there are a couple of things that maybe you would like to not be described as, then perhaps what behaviors should you be doing less of? So we've obviously covered the 5 leadership skills to the acronym of SHAPE. What we're going to do now is launch a poll to really help you identify which of the 5 categories of SHAPE do you feel is the greatest area of opportunity for your team or your business. And this is obviously hugely personal. Everyone will be different at different stages. And I think, you know, we've covered a lot of information today. And if we've done this webinar before in other countries, and there will be a very thorough takeaway document that you will get at the end of this that will allow you to put some of this in practice, some examples of how you can perhaps, try these out and maybe think about how you can be more agile, think about how you can energize, how you can be more innovative. So if you could all click which one of those 5 categories of shape that you feel would be the greatest area of opportunity for you in terms of your impact as a leader. You can click it for you personally, you can click it collectively as a group of leaders, or for your organization. That would be great. So Matt, I can see the poll, but I can't see the results. I presumed you just leave it for a while and then
I'm just waiting. People are still voting at the moment, so I'm just going to give it another couple of seconds.
Right,
So
I was panicking.
That's all right, no worries. I'm going to close the poll now, okay? And I'll share the results with you. There you go. So we've got them on screen.
So what you can see there is every single one. Obviously, have a flexible and agile approach has come out, which is not surprising, because I think that naturally, as I said earlier, is the hardest one. So I think it's one that we need to dedicate time to and focus on. But it's really interesting to see how it's split across all of the others. And that's because obviously it's down to your individual team, your individual business, where you're at, and what now can be. So what I think it does show you is effectively, which I'm super glad this has worked, is the fact that it's not these all in isolation. You probably need to have all of them to be a new era of leader, which is basically what we now need to be. We have to be seeking opportunity and anticipate. We've got to be flexible and agile. We know that's not going away. Innovation, I think, as ever, is, going to take our businesses to the next level. Trust and empathy and purpose were qualities that were super important before. And now I think they've become, they were kind of perhaps sleeping giants. I think they've become absolutely the future rock stars of leadership. So hopefully that was useful, just to see how some of your, yourself, but also your peers would have felt that. So just pulling this together, I'm just going to end with a quote which really summarizes the self-disruptive leader. And this, if you want to refer to more information about the self-disruptive leader, it's Korn Ferry. They've done some great work on it. And basically what the quote, I'm going to read it out because I think it's such a good quote, but our past is no longer a reflection of our future. A new set of principles are emerging, centered around trust and purpose. Workplaces that trust people closest to work are guided by a clear and compelling purpose, have future-focused, purpose-driven superiors who are key to absorbing, learning, and adapting to strategy in real time. So, as I said earlier, it's about challenging that status quo, acting and thinking differently, and having that permanent, evolving, curious mindset and that instinct of kind of knowing what to do even when you don't know what to do. So I think we'd all agree that the pandemic has given leadership its ultimate test, and everyone on this call would have no doubt learned some very, very painful lessons. I know we have in our behalf. But it is the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders who are the brightest and the best, who are using these self-disruptive skills, who are going to be able to pivot and change really effectively, who are going to help their organizations reform and adapt. And if you can lead with purpose, anticipate and seek opportunities, partner with your competitors internally and externally, build trust, drive teams with empathy and purpose, if we do that, we will be ready to help ourselves, our teams and our organizations meet the future, but more importantly, we'll be prepared to shape it. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd like to, we hope that the insights and perspectives have given you food for thought. As I said earlier, there will be a thorough takeaway that will be emailed to you that you can use perhaps with your team or use to reflect upon the acronym of SHAPE. But with that, thank you so much. We wish you all the best to your team, your organizations and your families. And I think I'm going to hand back to Steve now, but we're going to open up for some questions. If there are any, you can submit them into the chat function, or Matt will be able to take you off mute. So thanks again, and I'll pass back to you, Steve.
Perfect. And yeah, just to sort of mention as well that at this point in the webinar, we actually stopped recording just to make it a bit more of a sort of